So in the last video, we had stopped with the slide where we're talking about some disadvantages of the file-based system approach. So what I want us to do now is go into a little bit of details about each one of them. So imagine that you are a customer, you have a checking account in a bank. In addition to this checking account, you also have a debit card, you have a loan that you have on a car or on a house that you're purchasing. And all of a sudden you are going to move and you need to change your address. Now think about it. If you have a group of people managing your bank account, your checking account, and another department managing the debit card or your credit card, and another department who is managing your loan, how many places do you need to store? How many places is your address stored in? How many places do you need to make your address change in? And so we find that with a file-based system, because every group of people or every department is saving the information about a customer because they need access to this customer whenever they need to contact the customer, we find that we have something called data redundancy. We have redundant data that is stored in more than one place. And so when you need to make a change, now you need to make the change in more than one place. And so number one, you are wasting space. So if you think about, the information that you're storing, of course, your address is just a one-line address. But if it's a lot of information that we're storing or a lot of data that we're storing, and we're storing it in multiple places, then we are, because of this data redundancy, we are losing space because we're storing the same piece of information more than one time. Now, because of this data redundancy, where we have more than one user responsible for maintaining the information, because the information is stored in more than one place, we could potentially get data that is inconsistent. So you might call your checking account number and tell them this is my new address, and you might contact your credit card company with the bank and tell them this is my new address, but you forget to go to your loan department and tell them about your new address. And so when you have information that is stored in more than one place, there is a potential of data inconsistency, where you might have the data stored in one place conflicting with data stored in another place. You update it in one place, but you forget to update it in another place. Another common example, if someone has their name and they get married and they change their last name. Imagine how many places they have to go to change their last name. And so this is data redundancy, where you have the same information stored in one place. And because of data redundancy, you might run into inconsistency if you forget to update the information in all the places. So this is a disadvantage of the file-based system. And when we talk about the database system, we're going to see how we should make sure that we don't store redundant data, so we don't get into the data inconsistency problem. Let's talk about another problem that might have. So imagine that a user is paying a credit card bill from their checking account. So they have a checking account. Let's say the checking account has $1,000 in it. Their credit card bill comes in and it's $100, and they need to go pay this credit card. So they log in and they request a transfer to be made from the checking account into their credit card account so that the bill gets paid. So at the end of the day, what we want is the credit card to show a balance of 0 because it was paid, and the checking account to show a balance of 900, the 1,000 minus 100. But what could happen is that the money, as the money is transferred from the checking account, it gets deducted from the checking account and then deposited into the credit card account. And between the first transaction happening, the deduction of the $100 from the checking account, and between the second transaction, it getting deposited into the credit card account, you want these two transactions to happen almost simultaneously. And what happens is that with a file-based system, imagine the file-based system as two people in two different rooms. Someone is going to your checking account in one room, they take the $100 from your account, and then they walk over to another room to pay the credit card. When the money is taken from the checking account, if you look at that moment while this person is walking from one room to the other, if you were to look at your account, you will find that your account has $900, and you will find that the credit card is not paid. So this is not, this is not good. This problem is called data isolation. And I just want to tell you that this actually happened with me. I had two checking accounts in two different banks, and I was doing a transfer. Let's say I was doing a transfer of $100. And let's say on Friday, I made the transfer in the morning. And I check on Saturday, the money has been taken out from my first bank account, but it hasn't been deposited in my second bank account. I check Sunday, I check Monday, I check Tuesday. By Wednesday, the money got transferred. But in those few days, the money was already taken from my first checking account, and it was not deposited in the second account. So here you have two transactions that you need to happen. You want them to happen, and you want them to happen kind of like, at the same time, immediately at the same time, simultaneously. But that cannot happen with a file-based system. And so when we talk about data isolation, the question is, when should changes made by the first user, deducting something from your checking account, be visible by the other user who is depositing in the credit card? And so this is the problem, the data isolation. This is the problem that happens when you have a system that has more than one user, a user deducting and a user adding. And what happens with the data isolation, because the data is kind of isolated in two different places, you have it duplicated in two places, or you have data that you're taking from one place, putting into another place, that might lead to data integrity problems. And data integrity, when we want to talk about data integrity, we want to make sure the data is correct and consistent. And if you are talking about a checking account, money being deducted from it, not deposited into the credit card account to pay the bill, there we don't have data integrity. We don't have consistent, correct data. We have money that has been lost from one account and has not made it to the second account yet. This is a violation of data integrity. The data is not correct. You are looking at your credit card and your checking account, and all of a sudden you have $100 less than you should have. Okay, so data isolation, when you have data that needs to be transferred, but now you have more than one user making the change, you need to make sure the changes that are made by the users are made simultaneously, so that when any user looks at your system, they see consistent data. And that's called data integrity. Okay. Another form of data integrity is how information is stored. So if I was to look at, a 3, the interest rate, for example, and I see a 3, does that 3 mean it's 3%? Or here, when I look at 0.03, is 0.03 3%? So when you are storing information, you want to make sure that everyone is storing the information in a consistent way. When I'm storing someone's name, for example, is it first name space last name, or is it last name space first name, or is it last name comma space first name? That's also part of data integrity, making sure that all the data that is stored is consistent in all places. Okay, so that everyone is storing the data in the same expected format. Another example from MCC is your banner ID. So we know that the banner ID starts with the @ So if I ask you for your banner ID, should you be giving me the @ or should you just be spitting out the number? So here we need to make sure that when we request the banner ID to be saved somewhere, that all the departments are saving the banner ID in the same way. They're all storing it with the @ sign, or they're all storing it without the @ sign. And one of the issues with data integrity, when you have many departments and you have many concurrent users, who is responsible for making sure that the banner ID that is entered is correct? Who is responsible that the interest rate is correct? Okay, who is going to do the validation? When you have many people that are kind of looking at the data, you need to at least have someone who is responsible for the validation. You don't want the validation to be not happening at all, because that's not good. At the same time, you don't want the validation to be happening by many departments, because now you have duplication of effort. So there is the question of who is going to make sure that our data is valid, who is going to make sure that data integrity is maintained. So this is another disadvantage of the file-based system when you have more than one concurrent user. Another issue is security issues, problems. So for example, me as a professor, should I have access to information about your financial aid? Should I have access to this just because I'm your professor? And the answer should be no. So there should be information that is secure about you as a student that no one should be accessing except the department that needs to access it. Who needs to know your social security number? Me as a professor, I should not have access to your social security number. Okay, so for another example is here, if you have an employee and they are responsible for managing your credit card account. Okay, so they know that this is your credit card, you have a $1,500 limit on your credit card, and your bill is $300. Okay, now should this employee at the bank know that your checking account has $1,000 or $5,000 in it? Of course not. Okay, so here we come into security problems, protecting the data, making sure that it's secure, so that no one can access it except the people who really need to access it. Another issue is concurrency access. Concurrency access refers back also and talks about data, like kind of ties back to the data isolation that we just talked about in the previous slide, where we talk about multiple users accessing the same data and modifying the data at the same time. So here, when you do that, you need to make sure that whoever is accessing the information and updating it, no one else is updating it at the same time. So if I go into your checking account and I want to add in the interest, and I look at your account and I need to add the interest rate, I need to see how much you have in the bank. If someone at the same time is going in and saying, oh, I'm going to deduct $500, well, maybe I need to add the interest on before someone deducts so that my calculation is right. So when we have more than one person accessing the data at the same time, who's going to do their transaction first if one transaction depends on the other, for example. So this is another issue that we have with file-based system, making sure that when you have people who are accessing the information, how should they access the information at the same time? Okay, in a traditional file system, if you think about your on a computer, if you have a file and you open it and then someone else tries to open the file at the same time, it doesn't let you open for editing. So you can't have like a Word document that's opened twice, for example, on the computer for writing and editing. The first one will have writing privilege, the second one will have read-only privilege. Now, if you talk about Google Docs, of course, they've solved this where you can have two people writing in the document at the same time, as long as they're kind of writing in different parts of the file. But these are issues also with file-based system. The security problem, making sure that people don't access information they are not allowed to access. And then finding a solution for when multiple users want to access and modify the data at the same time. So those difficulties that we've talked about, the database approach, the database management system will solve them. And in the next video, we will see how they are solved.